Hello everyone, my name is Anju Singh and I work at the University of Calgary. Welcome to our first webinar in a series of webinars related to energy and the environment. Thank you so much for making the time to learn what our researchers are working on as it relates to renewable energy. And this webinar is entitled, Are We Ready to Flip the Switch on Clean Energy? So we'll have a lot of really great debate over here. But first, I just wanted to go over some of the housekeeping items, which are on the next slide. So, like I said before, this is a webinar series by our scholars, and information presented is a summary of their research. Please continue to submit your questions throughout the duration of the webinar. There is a box available to you, the Q&A box. If you send questions through that, we will see them over here, and we will be keeping our eye on the questions. You can also check the resources that we have provided. There are links to videos and ebooks, etc., related to this topic. So please feel free to check those out. Also, keep the conversation live on Twitter during the webinar using the hashtag #ExploreUCalgary, and give us your feedback through a survey. So there is a survey available to you. You don't need to obviously provide feedback now, but towards the end, we will leave a bit of time for you to give us your feedback, but at any time, feel free to go to the survey and give us your feedback. So thank you very much for that. And before I actually introduce Viola, I just wanted to go over the format of this particular webinar because it's a little different from the types of presentations we have done before, and if you've attended any of those, you may find this format different. We have 3 experts here, which is probably the biggest contingent that we have had thus far, so thank you to all our scholars for being here. We will cover off renewable energy technologies, followed by energy storage and fuel cells, and then social and economic impact of adoption of renewables. And as I introduce the scholars, I will point out which of these topics they will cover. This will be followed by a discussion that brings together various aspects of renewable energy beyond what was presented. And we will, as we keep our eye on the questions that you are sending through, we will be sure to include those questions in the questioning that we do later. However, we may not have time for all the questions because this is a huge topic of interest, and hundreds of you have signed up and have logged in. So please, we apologize in advance if we can't get to all the questions, but please do continue to send our questions because we do expect that there will be common threads across the questions that you put in. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our 3 speakers. The first slide here is Viola Birss. Viola is a world leader in the area of electrochemistry at surfaces and interfaces and in nanomaterials development for a wide range of clean energy applications. She's a professor in our Department of Chemistry in the Faculty of Science. Our other speaker is Mishka Lysack. Mishka's research focuses on the connections between a healthy environment, renewable energy, and a sustainable economy, as well as links between community, social health, and well-being. He's an associate professor in our Faculty of Social Work. So Viola will look at topics related to storage and fuel cells, etc. And then Mishka, as you can see from his area of expertise, will focus on the impact and the adoption and the societal and economic benefits and challenges, etc. But our first speaker today is David Wood, and probably his picture explains his area of expertise, although it's not just wind. David is a professor of renewable energy with our Schulich School of Engineering. He's director of the Wind Energy Institute of Canada. His main research is in wind turbine aerodynamics. But as you can see, his other areas of research include solar and wind and so on. So he can talk broadly about the technologies related to renewable energy. And with that, David, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anju, and thank you, everyone, for listening in. I'm going to start off by looking at some purely economic issues, and that is the price of electricity generation by various technologies. The table that you see in the slide that's up at the moment, it was developed by the US Energy Information Administration, and it's very recent data. It's from April this year. And the column that I've highlighted in the red box shows you the total system levelized cost of electricity for new plant that would be coming online in the next few years, in 2022 as it would be, as it says there. And you'll see that the table is divided into what are called dispatchable technologies, which are basically the conventional electricity generating technologies, and then down the bottom are the non-dispatchable technologies, and that is the intermittent technologies of onshore and offshore wind, solar PV, solar thermal, which means heating up a liquid to drive a turbine, and hydroelectricity, which probably everybody knows about. If you look at the total system levelized costs of electricity, then you can see that onshore wind is just about the cheapest form of electricity generation in North America at the moment. And that is a hugely important fact that I don't think many people know about. If we look down to solar PV, which is, apart from hydro, the closest competitor, you'll see that PV at the moment is significantly more expensive than wind, but it is forecast that within the next 2 years, the costs will be very similar. That wind will decrease, but solar will decrease even more rapidly.
So David, what is PV?
Yes, PV stands for photovoltaic. So we're talking about the solar panels that people usually use the term that they put on their roof, or in a large solar farm that would go in the country. The problem with hydroelectricity, even though it is also one of the cheapest forms of electricity generation, is that we're just about running out of sites for further hydroelectricity generation. So if we go on to the next slide and look at electricity generation in Canada, and I'm looking at the left-hand side to start off with, and you can see from that information there, because Canada makes extensive use of hydroelectricity, we actually have some of the cleanest electricity in the world at the moment. And you can see underneath that pie chart on the left that we have 64% of our electricity currently generated from renewable sources, and that puts us first in the G7. The problem that we have is, as I mentioned before, hydroelectricity resources are not available to the same extent as they used to be. And then if we look at the chart on the right that shows provincial characteristics of electricity generation and focus particularly on Alberta, which is where the University of Calgary is and where our research is, Nova Scotia and also Saskatchewan, you'll see that they have a significant component of coal-fired electricity generation. So even though overall in Canada we're doing well in terms of renewable energy, there's some particular jurisdictions like Alberta where we have to do a lot better. The relative costs that I showed you before in the context of the Alberta government's climate leadership plan, which aims to have 30% of our electricity generated renewably by 2030, means that nearly all of that is going to be wind power because it is at the moment by far the cheapest. If there are further developments on that renewable energy target, then no doubt solar PV photovoltaics will play a bigger role. Now,
so when we go camping and our tents are blown off by all the wind that we get in Alberta, we really should think about all the benefits that we get from that wind.
Yes, I agree. One of the nice things about working in wind energy is that when it's a lousy day, you feel good.
Can I just probe your comment about the hydro not being as accessible? What does that mean?
Well, it just means that we're running out of rivers and other resources that we can dam to produce hydroelectricity. And also, it's even though, for example, Alberta has very good hydro resources, it doesn't factor into forecasts of renewable energy generation because the challenges, the legal and other challenges that hydropower faces is probably going to mean that it won't be developed substantially.
Thank you.
So I'd like people to bear in mind the fact that Canada has a large proportion of its electricity generated renewably, while we look at this current slide, which shows prices of electricity, because this is what hits everybody's hip pocket and is very important. On the left is a table that shows the number of cents per kilowatt hour. That's kilowatt hour is a unit of electricity that you pay for. If you look at your electricity bill, that's what it's divided up into. There are significant variations across Canada. So Ontario is the most expensive, down to Manitoba is the cheapest. But if we look on the right-hand side, which shows average country prices for electricity, we'll see that Canada has just about the cheapest electricity in the world. Compare it to Australia, where I come from, it's a factor of 3 different, and that's a remarkable difference, given that we already have a significant amount of renewable energy generation in Canada. So one of the big challenges that we face as a society that's implementing more renewable energy, and as researchers that are working on these areas, is how we can extend the extent of renewable energy at the same time as keeping those prices low.
Can I also ask what actually influences this variability in prices? Is it access to the sources?
That's a very good question, yes. And if you go through the various provinces in Canada, they all have very different electricity systems. So Alberta has a very market-oriented system. A number of the other provinces have almost a government monopoly on it. And that has significant impacts on how it is charged. So, for example, at the moment in Alberta, with our free market system, the current wholesale price of electricity is somewhere about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And that means that all the electricity generators in Alberta are losing money at the moment, and they have been for about the last 6 months or so. Okay. So it's a very complex question that we could have several webinars. So we probably better leave it at that. Okay, I just wanted to say a few things about my particular research area of wind energy. I've already said that it's currently the cheapest form of renewable energy. The main problems with it, which we're going to cover some of these in the webinar, is its intermittent production. We get wind power when the wind blows, not when people want the power to be produced, and that feeds into issues like storage that Viola is going to talk about. There are issues with fitting wind turbines into the landscape, so bird and bat nest in certain circumstances can be an issue, and noise is often perceived as a problem for wind turbines. But the problem that I face as an engineer in this is that if we actually measure the noise level that wind turbines produce, it's actually very low, but it seems to irritate some people. The research areas that I'm involved in is how to improve the efficiency and the cost effectiveness of wind turbines, particularly as they get larger. That involves control of the turbines and protection of them in high winds, and it also involves what's called asset management of wind farms. So when you set up a wind farm, you have mechanical components, you have blades, and each of those has maintenance issues. Blades get eroded by dust and insect damage, gearboxes can fail, etc., etc. And one of the other problems, which is closely related to storage, is how do we integrate renewable energy with storage in an electricity system. And the next slide that I have is really meant to just give you, there we go, an indication of the enormity of the technology. This is a slide that shows sizes of wind turbines against things like football fields, Statue of Liberty, skyscrapers. So if we look at the wind turbine that's more to the left, the smaller one of the two, that is the size that is most installed in Canada. So if you drive out in the country and you see a wind farm, you'll probably be looking at turbines that are rated somewhere around 2 megawatts or so. The ones on the the ones on the right are primarily designed for offshore application, and you can see they're just getting bigger and bigger. And that's a real challenge for the research. We can't change much the aerodynamic efficiency of power extraction, but when we're dealing with wind turbine blades that are now 90 metres long, And you can see at the top of that figure a image of an aircraft that's actually a Boeing 747, which has a wingspan of 60 metres. That gives an idea of how large wind turbine blades are. And finally, I'd like to just briefly talk about one of my areas that probably won't get a lot said about it today, and that's the issue of renewable energy for developing countries, because I think renewable energy has a major role to play in development, because we know that a large proportion of the world's population is in poverty, and we need to work to get these people out of poverty, but we want to do that in a way that doesn't impose a greenhouse gas and environmental load on the planet. So I've just given a couple of images of small-scale remote power systems. They're both from Nepal, where I've worked for many years. And on the left is a small hydropower system. So you can see the little building that houses the hydro turbine, and if you look very closely, you can see the pipework that is carrying the water down from a canal, which is sort of at the top and on the left-hand side. So that's a system that would power a village. An alternative to that is shown on the right, which is a hybrid wind and photovoltaic system, also installed at a village in Nepal. And you can see in the middle photo on the right, the PV modules and the small wind turbines. Up the top is the controllers for those technologies, and down below on the left is a picture of a photo of the batteries that is used to store the energy. Now, this is a village that has never had renewable energy. It's never had energy of any form whatsoever, and it's a remarkable experience to go into the houses in those villages at night time when they've got their little lights going. And the big advantage of that is that they're not burning kerosene or other horrible fuels to make light at night. And so the health benefits of renewable energy there are enormous. And you can get an idea of the importance of this. One particular figure that I know is I've also worked a lot in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a population of about 100 million people, and of those 100 million, more than 70 million have no access to the electricity grid. So the scope for renewable energy in that context is very large. So that's a very quick view of my research. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, David, and we will hand over to Viola now. Okay. So, good to be here. Thank you for the invitation to participate. So, in line with our theme, which is, are we ready to flip the switch on clean energy, I'm going to be talking about some newish technologies that we're working on, and we have a pretty big team at USC involved in this, and that is to look at non-combustion ways of generating, efficiently and cleanly generating energy or electricity and possibly heat, possibly even using hydrocarbon, how we can do that efficiently and cleanly, as I said, but also how this technology can be used to store electricity, which was just alluded to. This is going to be an important issue, and increasingly so as we move to renewables. And the interesting feature that I'm going to stress is that we're working on a technology, as are other groups, where carbon dioxide, our ubiquitous greenhouse gas, can be fed into these devices during energy storage and make useful chemicals, that kinds of chemicals that make up our society, plastics and so forth, and polymers. These are all things that would fade away if we abandoned oil and gas entirely. So that's kind of a broad intro to what I'm going to talk about in these 4 or 5 slides. Okay. So I'm going to have to use here. Okay, so linking up with David's talk, one of our issues with renewables is that we have challenges with the large-scale, long-term storage of electricity. And this slide shows that we're okay when we have hydrocarbons, petroleum, gas. We can store natural gas in underground caverns in very large quantities. We can store petroleum in tankers and there are many ways, pipelines, et cetera, but we really don't have that for electricity. We really are challenged in that way. So going to the next slide,
This shows, very colorful, this shows that we do have options for the storage of electricity, and it is electricity that renewables generate. They would make electrons, as I would call it. And on the left, you see what are called mechanical systems or options. Pumped hydro, that's pushing water up a hill and letting it fall again. And for that, you need the right topology or topography of the region you're in. Compressed air, fly wheels, these are just examples of older methodologies for storing electricity. People are working on these, trying to make them better, cheaper, smaller, etc. Okay. Where we're really focused is more in that middle box, and you saw it in the title slide of my title slide, which is electrochemical, chemical, and even that top box on electrical. So electrochemical, I won't get into the weeds on what I mean by that, but I think many of you know what rechargeable batteries are. We all use them. And in fact, our broader team at U of C, through a group called Caesar Tech, my last slide, we have a group working, right at the frontier of new all-solid-state lithium-ion batteries that are, getting everybody excited. So there's new directions there. Redox flow batteries, these are also being thought of for large-scale grid storage. We have, arguably, I would say, the largest team in Canada, probably by far, actually, largest team in Canada that is working on new directions, lower cost, more efficient, more durable, safer flow batteries. On the top right, capacitors. These are devices some of our team members are working on to handle the flicker of solar and the flicker of wind, something that can respond quickly and store or deliver electricity quickly. The one I'm focusing on, however, is on the bottom middle, which it has the title chemical, but it is really electrochemical as well. And these are devices that were alluded to already in the introduction and in some of the bullets there. These involve fuel cells, so they're sort of like a battery but different. I'll show you on the next slide, but they involve injecting common fuels into these devices. They look like batteries. That fuel then is converted to heat and electricity cleanly, efficiently, and that's like a battery discharging. When you want to recharge the fuel cell, that's called electrolysis, and that's when we feed in magically carbon dioxide or steam, water, whatever, but carbon dioxide, and we can make these unique and useful and important fuels, chemicals, etc., that would otherwise not be there. None of this involves burning, by the way, so I'll say more in a moment. I will just say one more thing about fuel cells here. Many of you may be aware of, if you're interested in the transportation sector, that something called PEM fuel cells, I won't bore you again with the details, but there is a type of fuel cell that's really making inroads into the electric vehicle space. These operate on hydrogen, so that's one of the challenges, but companies like Toyota have a car on the market. It's called the Mirai, and ready to go. You need to find a hydrogen filling station, but it's definitely very clean. Hydrogen goes in, air goes in, and water is the only product. Hyundai, Honda, GM, all working in those kind of areas. So it is finally seemingly moving. Okay, so on the next slide, I'm going to be talking about another type of fuel cell. These are all solid-state fuel cells, sometimes called solid oxide fuel cells, and when they run in reverse, they're called solid oxide electrolysis cells. When you look at this picture, many of you who have some techie interest, you might think it looks a lot like a battery. There are 3 layers, some electrodes, separators. The difference between this and the battery, as I alluded to earlier, is that a battery is finite in its capacity. As big as the size of the battery, that's how long it will last. These devices will keep going as long as you keep pushing fuel in. So it's a little bit like our current technology of vehicles. When we fuel up, as long as we have fuel in the tank, things keep going. In our homes, if we have enough natural gas coming in, things will keep going. So these are really kind of different. They're kind of a hybrid with batteries. This type of fuel cell, as you can see top right, can operate on conventional hydrocarbons, actually, on natural gas. So I often think of this as a bridging technology between where we are now and where we'll go down the road. So we can operate on conventional hydrocarbons, bring in air on the other side. That's not a big problem. We make electrons. Somehow my slide just jumped. Back we go. Electrons, electricity, heat. If we bring in hydrocarbons, yes, as you see on the right, we will make CO2. But the big plus of this technology is it's not about burning. So you don't make all the particulates and NOxes and SOxes that we know give us health problems, asthma, smog, etc. This is a clean technology. It's also very efficient. So typically people report efficiencies of these big devices in the order of 90%. So this is an exciting technology. And again, now this is delivering clean energy. If we want to store energy, we push those electrons in the opposite direction. We now feed in what's the green arrow on the right, and maybe the yellow arrow would feed in CO2, and then we make the fuel at one electrode, and we make clean, perfectly clean, pure oxygen at the other. There's a lot of high-tech stuff here, but it is an exciting combination for me of clean, efficient energy generation and storage. Okay, this slide, now just jump to the next one, shows how this could operate. So we're looking at wind and solar on the left, and of course thinking whether or not we have excess generation. Even now, we may have excess generation without renewables in the mix. So what do we do with them? If we have excess generation, the little boxes in the right of that thing that just appeared on screen, we would feed in, for example, carbon dioxide or mixed with steam or steam alone, and we would make those useful products. We make hydrogen, or what's called syngas, or fuels. And if we, on the other hand, require energy, it's peak demand, then we inject that fuel into the one side of the fuel cell, air into the other, and we make the product and store it. So this is, you could actually substitute in here batteries. Batteries could do what I'm showing here. Capacitors can do this as well. What the cool feature for me is here is that we can bring in that carbon dioxide and actually use it, thereby dealing with our problem greenhouse gas at the same time. That's the wrong thing, just a second. So moving on, and I just wanted to say that the way this is drawn in a kind of a unit like this, you would have gas storage capability, or the gases could go off into a pipeline and be brought back in via some kind of feed like a pipeline. This is my second to last slide, just again wanting to tell everybody what we're really doing in this space. We're not the only group trying to make these what are called reversible solid oxide fuel cells, namely the same box can run in both directions. Another option might be to have two separate boxes. One of them is the energy storage one. You switch over to the energy production one. We're working on trying to make a single unit run in both directions. And where we've had our breakthrough is in the catalyst, the actual materials that are in those cathode, anode, cathode gray boxes in those devices. We have some very, very promising materials that are low in cost, durable, they're tolerant to any kind of H2S, but people always worry about H2S, especially in Alberta. They're very active. They can be used on the same material can be used in all four of those gray boxes, so that cuts down immensely on manufacturing costs and so forth. And we're very excited about this, and we have a lot of support right now from industry and government to actually scale up our materials and our devices, and we're moving towards prototype testing of this concept. Last slide is just to kind of summarize and say that our group, which is called Tech, you can see the full name of this team on the top of the slide, and we are actively engaged then, as I said, in the fuel cell and electrolysis space, needing that reversible gas storage potentially to push gases back and forth as needed, batteries, capacitors. But as you look around those three central boxes, you'll also see, for example, electrochemical remediation. You can also store electricity while you're cleaning up water. So I'm always looking for these synergies, and so we have several groups in this team trying to bring both of those features together: store electricity, which we desperately need, and do something else that's beneficial to society at the same time. And just to say, you also see modeling around the edges, integration, management, trying to decide which of these technologies fit best for which part of Alberta, which part of Canada or the world, and then, of course, life cycle analysis or assessment, which helps us to be careful that we don't, with our new technologies or materials, have some unintended consequence that could be harmful to the environment or very expensive. So all in all, our team is really trying to satisfy what our webinar is about, to try to accelerate the ability to flip the switch on clean energy.
Thank you very much, Viola.
Yeah.
And with that, we will hand over to Mishka. There are a few questions that have come in, but we're holding questions to the discussion after this.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to co-present today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion and conversation towards the end of the webinar. I'm going to be focusing in on more the economic, social, and even health impacts. And I want to emphasize a few key areas. So right now, as you're looking at the slide, what you can see are the federal targets for the Republic of Germany. Germany has a reputation of, I think, breaking a lot of ground, being an innovator, and providing leadership in terms of moving towards renewable energy. And as you can see, there are three categories that they want to address: issues of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You can see the targets there of 80 to 95% by 2050, but also increasing the amount of renewable electricity and, more broadly, renewable energy. So here we're including the heating, cooling sectors as well as the transportation sector. And then the third cluster is around energy efficiency and conservation, the reduction of the use of energy. You also will notice that they have very clear targets in terms of timelines with 10-year increments. With some of them, they're now even looking at 5-year increments. And this is a very helpful, I think, a process that the German government has put into place, because it's provided a climate of certainty, which is very important for investment, for economic development, and for strengthening the economy. It makes it very accountable and transparent. The public knows exactly where things are at. And then they also have a committee, an independent committee of 5 people who provide every 2 years a clear analysis of how they're making progress on that. Okay, and the next slide looks at the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that have been avoided through their use of renewable energy sources in Germany. And you can see that those are increasing quite substantially as time has gone on. But one of the features, I think, of how Germany is doing their transition is really interesting. And here I sort of see this as an opportunity for us as Canadians, because what's happened in Germany is that ordinary German citizens are finding themselves to be empowered new stakeholders, or energy citizens. The word is actually Energiebürger, in a new energy system with inclusive business models and a very innovative policy approach. And I think that's something that many Canadians are very interested in, what the potential of that looks like. I think I skipped one slide. Let me go back here. Yes. So here on this slide, you see a breakdown of the ownership of installed renewable energy capacity. And this is as of 2012 in Germany. And if you look on the left-hand side, you see that the two green sections, one with private individuals and the other with farmers, shows that 46% of the renewable energy is owned by ordinary people. And you can see the breakdown of other areas, industry banks and investment funds and so on and so forth. But if you look on the right-hand side, the little blue one, which is 5%, those are the big four power providers, or the utilities, which have, by and large, because they chose to focus on coal and nuclear, they've been bypassed. Now they're becoming interested because this is where the growth industry is. But in the meantime, what this is created a very unique configuration of ownership, which means that people are benefiting economically from this and feel very much that they're participating in the new economy. And I think this has enormous potential for us as Canadians, and it's something we can certainly talk about in more detail. One of the main ways that this happens is through the development of energy cooperatives. You can see that it's increased certainly since 2008, growing and developing quite quickly. But there are many other business models too. For example, many of the cities and regions also provide other ways for citizens to become involved, sometimes through direct ownership or sometimes because the region itself has ownership and control of the energy that's being produced. Here's a map of Germany. This is as of 2013. If you look at the areas that are darker green in color, those are the areas that already, as of 2013, have 100% renewable energy. And that's, at that point, was over 9 million Germans. Then the light green areas include those other areas that haven't achieved that yet, but they have certified plans put in place that have scientific analysis, citizen participation and deliberation, that business case that's been developed, and it's something which more and more of them have become involved with. And if you add those two regions together, over 21.2 million Germans are in regions that already have renewable energy, which is quite remarkable, and I think has enormous potential implications for us as well. Here's another map which shows actually more recently, not just the ownership but also the engagement in many different ways, and you can see very clearly that it's more than 50% now of Germany geographically is moving significantly in that direction. What's also very interesting is who is not doing it, which is very largely, but not totally, in the former East Germany. An interesting topic perhaps for a question later on. But we see some of this starting to develop in our own country here. And I think one good example is the Super First Nation on Vancouver Island, where here we have a picture of one of the solar panels on their community center. And I think this quotation from Chief Gordon Plains, that First Nations have lived for thousands of years without fossil fuels, and it's appropriate that First Nations can lead the way from depending on fossil fuels and rely on them, power of the elements of sun, wind, and the sea once again. I think it's very inspiring, very hopeful, and I think we're seeing more and more Indigenous communities doing precisely that. Here's an image again of the community center with those wonderful Salish designs on the top of the roof. Here we have a slide of how they also involve sustainable agriculture, where the community and even children are very directly involved with the development of that. And then we have the four key strands of energy autonomy, food self-sufficiency, cultural renaissance, and economic development, and a real opportunity for them to develop these opportunities for their community. I think the other thing I want to finish with is to talk about how renewable energy and energy efficiency can be a real tool for job creation, economic development, as well as climate protection. Here's a graph in terms of Germany showing the green bars, which are jobs that have been generated in renewables. And there are now about 346,000 jobs in the renewable energy sector in Germany, and how that compares with more traditional forms of energy like coal mining and conventional fuels. Here's another example of it in terms of 2013. As of then, there was 371,000, and the breakdown of the different forms of energy that generate that employment. We know this is happening worldwide with over 6 million people who are currently employed in renewable energy around the world. And this is a very interesting slide. This comes from the research of Professor Poland at the University of Massachusetts. And what he was interested in with his research team was, do different forms of energy have different capacity or potential for creating jobs? And the tool they used was, they said, if we spend, as a community or as a country or a province, $1 million of investment, how many jobs, and we're talking about long-term jobs here, are created. So if you look at the chart on the left-hand side, you see the natural gas and coal create about 5 or 7. If you then compare that with renewables like wind and solar and biomass, kind of in the middle, that there are significantly more jobs per $1 million of investment. But then as you start to add in the other things, like the smart grid, for example, with 12, or building retrofits with 17, or mass transit with 22, that really becomes very significant. We're now talking about an enormous potential, and especially because as we build out and move to a renewable energy-based electricity system, then that can serve as a platform for other sectors such as heating and cooling and transportation. And in fact, those other sectors, this is called sector coupling, those other sectors can sometimes be the storage, and then other times they can use the energy, such as electric cars using energy as the person that's driving it, but then it can be battery storage, at least technically, in terms of, say, at nighttime when it's being recharged as well. So I think that's an important piece. There's a chart of some of the other more specific data.
And then you add all of that together, it starts to show really big numbers.
That's right. That's right. So just very quickly to conclude, I think what we're also talking about is not just a renewable electricity, but also shifting into zero emissions in terms of our building, doing that, I think, very aggressively. Here's an example of a passive house, which it becomes really almost neutral in terms of its emissions. Here's at least some beginnings of what would happen as we retrofit our homes, some of the savings that we have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also monetary savings, but also the economic energy that starts to produce in terms of creating jobs indirectly and directly, as well as economic activity otherwise. But we're also going to have to shift our transportation sector. That's going to include walking, cycling, car sharing, transit, and rail, which is happening a great deal around the world, especially in Europe, because it generates a large amount of income as well as creating jobs. And then finally, that we can also start to look at shifting our entire transportation in terms of our city transportation and so forth to a more renewable energy economy. And then finishing with this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt: "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mishka. That was a great ending to your presentation, in fact, to all of our presentations here. So we're now moving into the Q&A section of our webinar. And as we have suspected, there have been loads of questions coming in. So the questions that I'm going to ask are going to be a combination of the questions that we have seen coming in through the question box here, and also some of the conversations that we've seen on social media. There's clearly a lot of questions that people have related to this topic. So one of the things that I think we very quickly touched upon was nuclear as a form of, or as a source of renewable energy. How does that stack up against the other sources?
I'll start off on an answer to this. I think it stacks up very badly. There's 2 major nuclear power stations being built in Europe at the moment. One's Flamanville in France, and the other is a place in Finland whose name I can't pronounce, so I won't try. Both of those projects are years behind schedule, and they're millions of dollars per budget. If you look at the situation in the UK, where the UK government has decided to pay Electricité de France to build nuclear power stations in the UK, it's been estimated that the UK public is going to subsidise that by about $50 billion. And this is the technology that we don't need, because it's significantly more expensive than renewable options, and it has enormous add-on problems like proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. Would anyone else like to add anything?
Yes, I think the other issues that still have to be resolved are things that many of us are already aware of, like what happens to the waste and the possibilities of materials not only perhaps leaking the environment, but also in terms of terrorist use of those in terms of weapons. But I think the two that often people don't think about, one is that the capital is moving away from that Hinkley Point C in the UK, that they had real problems finding financing for this. And there's a real possibility that nuclear reactor, which is currently still being developed, could become a stranded asset. And so a stranded asset is, one of the things that strikes fear into the hearts of investors and markets as well, that you can put a huge amount of money in, but then not be able to extract the value for the economic growth because it's not something that you can use. The other thing quickly that is also happening is there's quite a shift that's happening, especially obvious, I think, in Germany, in the grid and the market. That there's a movement away from this common notion that we all have of having a base load, whether it's coal or in some places nuclear, like in Ontario or other things, to rather having a much more flexible system and one that is more distributed, so that's more resilient, but also one that there's higher levels of interaction. And I think this is something which is clear not only in terms of how the economics and markets are changing, but also the technology itself. And so the technology now, they're talking about how they're getting windows of, they can redispatch energy, for one place that has extra electricity to another location that needs that electricity, that the windows of time are getting smaller and smaller. They're really projecting maybe getting down to a few seconds in maybe the next 10 years or so. But then also the markets itself are shifting in that respect as well. And that instead of having an inflexible form of energy like nuclear, which you can't power up and power down rapidly like many other forms of energy, that you need something which is much more flexible, responsive, and that there's times of having both demand and the provision of energy is made more available, that happens more rapidly. And that's something that I think really works against nuclear in terms of it doesn't have that kind of flexibility.
So, and I can just add a couple of small things. Everything just about has been said, but I agree fully that the world is moving to what they call distributed generation model, where we move away from the large power plants that can go down and then blackouts to localized energy generation, or electricity generation. I would just say that there is now a much smaller scale nuclear capability devices that are being produced that are in the multi-megawatts, but still quite small. So that is a new development, and I think Canada is playing a role in that. And then the only other thing I was going to say for what I was discussing is that even nuclear, should that be the case, and of course it is in Ontario and France and so on, when the grid is full, we do waste that electricity. And again, electricity storage, even working with nuclear, would be a big benefit. So a lot of these electrochemical methodologies are sort of agnostic in terms of where the electrons come from. So should it go in that direction, and should countries get wiser about not wasting the electricity that still comes from nuclear coal, we should be looking at these energy storage options.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we have had a few questions related to solar that have come in. So solar is incredibly expensive to implement currently. Any projections on how quickly costs might come down? David, do you want to take that?
Well, I would dispute that it's incredibly expensive at the moment, because if you go back to my first slide, it's about 30% more expensive than wind and hydro, which are the cheapest form of electricity. The cost projections that I've seen is that the massive decline in the price of solar photovoltaics, which has happened over the last 15 years or so, will continue. And sometime about 10 years away, the cost of photovoltaics will be comparable to the cost of wind.
Okay, that's great. Another one related to solar is it takes up so much space, both for panels and batteries. What are the prospects for making solar more space efficient as well?
Very good, but that is probably a long-term objective, because what's very interesting about the technologies that appear, and I'm talking about that table that I showed again. I think everybody can see that. The cheap renewable technologies are actually the oldest technologies. The wind power hasn't changed fundamentally in its basic principles for 50 years. Hydroelectricity is the same basic principles that it was 100 years ago. What has driven down the price here, and sorry, I forgot solar photovoltaics, the technologies that are now being sold commercially and are subject to those very rapid reductions in price are technologies that are about 30 years old. So that's very old relatively for solar photovoltaics. The research front on photovoltaics is very exciting. There's a whole range of new technologies coming out. There are research photovoltaic systems that are getting nearly 50% efficiency compared to commercial system, that I've never seen a commercial system more than about 18% efficient. So in principle, this will happen, but what's necessary to get it to be competitive with the numbers that are in that table is to make the leap into mass production and big markets.
Great, thank you for that. Another one related to solar is about places which have short periods of daylight, such as our northern communities.
Yes. Surprisingly, there's a lot of photovoltaics in the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. And I realized that the reason why a few years ago, and that's because I'm involved with the Arctic Institute of North America, which is housed on the University of Calgary campus. And they have a research station at a place called Kluane Lake, which is about 2 hours away from Alaska on the Alaska Highway. So it's about, I think, 62 degrees north. And it's running at the moment on diesel fuel, and they want to replace that with photovoltaics. So we did a study of how much photovoltaic energy they could expect, and bearing in mind that the research station is only open during summer, we were actually quite amazed to find that over summer, a photovoltaic system at Kluane Lake in the Yukon would produce more power than one in Barcelona. So the summer production in the north can be very high. Of course, they pay for it in winter, but a lot of communities, particularly in the Northwest Territories, have decided that that trade-off is worthwhile because it's reducing the load on conventional sources. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why you would want to do that. The cost of transporting it to remote locations, as well as greenhouse and environmental issues.
Right, and at the times of the year when you do get a lot of daylight hours, there's
a big payoff. Yes.
Okay, that's great. And so from that, we will move to the big question, which is, what are the projections for how quickly we can transition? We talked of the whole idea of this webinar is, are we ready to flip the switch? We've seen, Mishka, with some of the information that you shared, that some places have already moved. But generally, if you talk about Canada as an example, how far away might we be? Is it a few years? Is it decades? Is it centuries? What are we looking at? It's a big question, so everyone's thinking.
Yes.
I think part of that, I'll take the first crack at that question, which is an important question. Part of it will depend on, I think, the conditions that are created by various governments at different levels. And here we're talking federal, as well as provincial, as well as the city, because I think the cities have a really important role to play. In fact, only last week there was a report put out by the Columbia Institute in BC that the cities could really maybe address 50% of their energy consumption. And they were very specific about, here are some of the good things that the federal government has already done, but here are a lot more. This list was much longer. Other things the federal government or provincial government could do to certainly encourage the uptake of renewable energy. I think the other piece too is our current federal government is very active and interested in investing in innovative technologies, of investing right across Canada in various ways. A lot of this is traditional infrastructure like building bridges and so forth. But a lot of that is also very much going to we hope anyway, be directed towards building out our capacity to move on renewable energy. And one thing that's been talked about is would it be possible to build some interties between provinces? And we're not talking like the railway, building something right across Canada. I mean, that just wouldn't be practical. It would be extremely expensive. But if you could bring together sort of coupling pairs of provinces, like obviously BC and Alberta could share in terms of solar wind energy that we have, whereas a lot more hydro, but also wind and so forth in BC, whereas if you move through kind of eastward in Canada, you could pair together Saskatchewan, which also has good solar and wind resources in southern Saskatchewan, but linking with Manitoba that has hydro. And you can see how this is developing. And I know that the Caesar Institute is one of the institutes, among others, that is actually actively researching, what would be the technical challenges of that. So I think it will depend on the responses of governments and creating, as they have in Germany, creating the conditions that are favorable for people who and constituencies and governments to take that leadership. So the provinces that want to move forward, or the cities that want to really move forward in the same kind of way, that the tools are provided for those communities to do that. And that's why, when you looked at that map of Germany, there are some that are white. There's some places that haven't done that because no one's forced to do it. But there were also many more communities that have said, yes, we're very interested in that. And I think that's something that could happen here in Canada. And every level of government, I think, has a way of contributing to that and creating favorable conditions for that to take place.
Exactly, and we saw from your data that it's the private individuals that are taking a lot of initiative in places that the adoption has been great. I'm very cautious of the time. We don't have that much time left, but I was wondering if Viola and David, you might want to weigh in to the answer.
I could just say a couple things here. One is that I was on a Royal Society panel not so long ago about the future of transportation in cities, and it's true that the cities themselves, the mayors, are critical, mayors and city councils, and in fact they attribute much of the movement in the United States towards EVs to leadership by mayors, city mayors, above and beyond leadership from states and federally. So that was one thing I was going to add to the mix. The other is that in Alberta, we have tremendous technical capabilities from our oil and gas sector, and I think this could all be accelerated if these companies would be willing and nimble to move partly towards renewable energy, because the skill sets of the people that have been working in oil and gas are exactly those skill sets we need for renewable energy. So, that's the nimbleness and willingness of our oil and gas sector to add on and move into these new directions could help us a lot too, and move this more quickly. Because we've got infrastructure, we've got people, we've got wealth, prosperity, etc. It could happen more quickly if everybody got on board.
I would just like to follow up on Viola's comments about oil and gas capabilities, because that feeds directly into geothermal energy, which is not a technology that we've discussed today, but in certain parts of Canada, particularly BC, it's very promising. And geothermal energy is about digging wells in the ground. So we're very good at that in Alberta.
Right. Okay, that's great. There's a couple more that I will push in, although we are a little bit over our time, but there were many people that asked the question. So wind. When will we be moving to bladeless or smaller turbines, because the existing ones cause things like bird and that?
Well, that is arguable on average. If you look at a typical turbine like these ones in southern Alberta, and you look at the data from around the world, typically one of those turbines would kill 2 birds a year, which is not very much. So it means that bird preservation societies like the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds are actually heavily in favour of wind energy, because they believe that the threat of global warming far outweighs often and sometimes genuine local concerns about bird and bat populations.
And there's one related to storage. Apart from your own research on energy storage, Viola, are there other technologies that you're seeing developing that show a broad breadth of effort on development of storage technologies?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, I did cover those off a little bit. So we're heavily invested in this electrochemical type of technology, but certainly there's a lot of excitement around batteries, and we've heard about those. So I would say that probably is one of the biggest areas, and that really is the one I would highlight in addition to what I was talking about, is batteries of all sorts. And it is quite remarkable how ingenious people are to come up with new ideas. Some people worry, for example, for lithium-ion batteries, that we are running out of lithium. I'm sure people listening will have heard of that. Also, that the lithium is found in countries that we may not be that friendly with. So for example, people are now looking at, many groups are looking at magnesium-based batteries, or zinc-based batteries, or aluminum-based batteries. So there's a lot of work going on in those directions. Also, I guess, is direct use of solar to make fuels, solar fuels. That's an area I didn't touch on, but lots of excitement there. Shine light on chemicals and make directly, with no other electrodes or anything else needed, but directly make hydrogen and oxygen, for example, with light. Store those, react them together later, get energy. So that's another area of interest.
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, and just build on what you said, is that there's also an increasing amount of research about how that may play a particularly important role in the later stages of our transition. When you think of this as decarbonization, which is a term that's becoming more kind of a general term, that these ideas of power to X, so power to heat, power to electricity, power to gas, and so on, are seen, especially what's seen is going to be the most difficult, probably the last stage, which is around industrial production. How do we produce steel, concrete, and so on, which obviously we need in terms of our cities. And this is seen as being one of the tougher things that's going to require more research. But I think that's where the research is going quite actively. And there's now, I was in Irvine, California a month ago, and they're doing it, they certainly have that working model that can be scaled up, they think. But this is also being researched in countries as different as India and Belgium. So that there is a lot of interest in that, which is more long-term, but I think we have to be thinking down the road. It's going to be about 2030, 2035, where we've had more electrification of all the different sectors. We've transformed, moved our electricity to renewable forms, but then having it as a platform for those developments.
And maybe I could just add that the decarbonization, it has a challenge, and that challenge is when you look around your space, we're ensconced in materials that are made from carbon and hydrocarbon. Everything you see, hydrocarbons. So we need to be able to produce those as well.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. This has been a great discussion, and we've actually had a few people that have said renewables have a PR problem. And so, what is the University of Calgary doing about that? And this is one of our, pieces of our effort to take the, fact-based research that we do over here and take it out to the community. So thank you to everyone that attended. As I said right at the start, please don't forget to fill out the survey. Your feedback really gives us an idea of whether you found our information useful or not. Also, we have a number of other webinars coming up, and please be sure to sign up for them. In the next couple of weeks, we have Leaving Carbon Behind, and we touched upon this in this webinar as well. But there's another one coming up, and after that, climate change in Canada's Arctic, and then, our laws keeping up. So we're looking at the same, area with different lenses. So if you're interested, please do sign up. And in case you have other ideas on topics that we should be covering, let us know. Email us at exploreucalgary@ucalgary.ca. So with that, again, thank you very much to our panel, and thank you to all our participants. We will leave the webinar open for just one more minute so that you can fill out the survey, and then we will sign off. Thanks once again.